That's good. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. Looks like it's about time, so we can go ahead and get started. My name is Jason Johnston. I work for the Outlook team, mostly on the programmability side, so all the APIs and the Outlook part of the graph is definitely a big part of that. So this is the kind of the plan here of what I'm going to talk to you guys about. Go a little bit over what the graph is, why it exists, why we have put it out there. Kind of give you an overview of what's there now, what's new, and maybe a little bit of what we're planning to bring in the near future. And then gonna kind of show you an example of a line of business app and maybe try to spark some ideas for your own type of line of business apps that take advantage of the graph. Before I dig in, how many of you guys are actually developers? Okay, quite a bit. And how many of you guys are like system admins, IT, that kind of thing? Okay, cool. Well, the graph. The whole thing with the graph is obviously developers will be very interested in the graph, but we kind of want the graph to be something that's easily attainable for non-developers. So hopefully after we get through this talk, you guys will kind of have some ideas on how you guys can go back and use the graph. So Office platform, you guys probably saw something kind of like this or similar to this during the keynote if you went to the keynote, but the Office platform, we like to think of it being kind of divided up into three silos or three columns, whatever. So the first one being add-ins and web parts. This is not really what we're going to talk about today, but the graph could certainly be used by add-ins or web parts. Web and device apps. This is really where the graph tends to really shine. Third-party web apps or internal web apps or mobile apps, things on your phones or your iPads or what have you. And then there's voice, video, connectors, and bots, kind of the everything else silo, if you will. And again, the graph can be used here, but maybe not so much. Okay, so what is the graph? Well, it's a single API that really kind of tries to reach across all the services that Microsoft has to offer. Okay, so it's a single API for accessing data, whether that be Outlook data, mail, appointments, that sort of thing, OneDrive, files, metadata, SharePoint, things like that. So we give these sort of REST paths that get you to these different things. /me being the authenticated user, other users in your organization, groups, messages, drives for your OneDrive, that sort of thing. Nope. Traversing data. So this is a big feature of the graph. It's not just about, I need to get to my Outlook email. I get to my Outlook email, and then how does that relate to other things? How does it relate to OneDrive? Maybe there's attachments in OneDrive, right? And through the graph, we can traverse right from that email to the OneDrive to access that data, or back into Active Directory to get information about the person who sent the email. And it's all through RESTful paths, right? So drives, items, IDs, last modified by user. That would be your link from a OneDrive item back to an Active Directory user, the last person who modified that item. And then finally, accessing insights, okay? The graph also exposes statistics about what are people doing, who do I interact with, who interacts with this file, that sort of thing. And it works across both work, school, what we call Office 365, and personal accounts, right? So like your Outlook.com accounts, your Microsoft accounts, personal OneDrive, graph works across all these things. HTTPS graph.microsoft.com, that is your API endpoint. That's your beginning point for all of these things. Okay, so to give you an idea of why this is kind of a big deal is, let's look at the state of the world before the graph. So before the graph, we still had all those services, and we still had APIs that could get to all those services. But they were very different, right? Not only were they completely different APIs with different patterns to access them, but in some cases, they had completely different authentication methods, especially when you looked at work and school accounts versus personal accounts. Now today, with the Microsoft Graph, you have one single authentication method that works across both work and school and personal accounts, and you have one single API that accesses all this data. And just to make the point, this is sort of the state before the graph. And you can see, just looking at these different URL patterns to access the different types of data, very widely different, okay? Especially look at this graph in SharePoint Online URL. Kind of a mess. And now with the graph, things get much more uniform. Okay. So we can get to everything from the user to their photos, to their mail, to their notes, to their OneDrive items, all in a very predictable manner. Okay, so what's new in the graph? Well, over the last year, we've been bringing on more and more services into the graph. It really sort of started with the Outlook Mail, Calendar, and Contacts, and OneDrive. But we have been adding Azure Active Directory, Office 365 groups and conversations, so there's full access to groups if you guys have started using those or started looking at those. Webhooks for Outlook data, so you can get subscribed when things change in Outlook data. And SharePoint and Live ID profiles. So what has just recently come online? Well, we recently added an Excel API into the graph. So if you're accessing Excel files in OneDrive, you can actually work directly with the Excel file rather than having to download the file and work with it offline. So a RESTful API to modify the Excel files directly. Webhooks for OneDrive, so we took that notification mechanism that Outlook started with, and OneDrive now supports it as well. So you can register to be notified when files are added or files are modified, that sort of thing. Extending the graph with your own line of business info for Outlook. So this is, if you guys are at all familiar with sort of some of the older APIs for working with Outlook, you know that you could add your own sort of custom fields to Outlook items, custom data. You can now do this through the Graph API as well. And we'll see a demo of that a little bit later. And finally, the Find Meeting Times scheduling API. So this kind of gives you guys, through the graph, the same ability that Outlook has when you're trying to schedule a meeting between people, of finding those times where everyone is marked available. What's new in preview? So this one's pretty exciting. SharePoint sites and lists. So the SharePoint sites and lists are now available through the graph. There's still some things that we can't do. It's still in preview, so they're still working on sort of bringing everything online. But we can add items to lists. We can pull items from lists, things like that. We can't create sites yet, but they're working on that. Hybrid on-premise support for Outlook. So up until now, accessing data has all been in the cloud. So all of the graph has only worked if your data is in the cloud. Well, we're now announcing that if you have a hybrid setup with your Outlook, your Exchange servers, you can now access data for users that have their mailboxes still on your on-premise servers all through the graph. At mentions, so if you guys, again, this is an Outlook thing, but if you have been using Outlook 2016 and some of the later builds, you may have noticed that you can now sort of @mention people in the body of the email, and it marks that email as for them as, hey, you're mentioning this needs your attention. That's supported in the graph, so you can pull that data and find out, is that user mentioned in this email? Simpler query syntax, so we've heard a lot of feedback. Our queries are all OData based, and OData sort of has some reserved keywords like filter and order by and things like that that are typically prefaced with a $. We've heard feedback from people that it sort of screws up their queries, or it's a little confusing, hard to read, so we're rolling out support to actually just drop the $, make things a little cleaner. OneDrive large file uploads, so the graph has been limited in the past to sort of smaller file sizes. So we're working to bring that up, so just like the normal OneDrive client or uploading through your browser, you can upload those large files as well. Intune API, so if you guys are using Intune in your organization, you can now use the graph to provision apps, assign apps to users or groups of users. That's all supported. And then we've expanded Azure AD support so that you can get to admin units, invitation manager, all of these things that are listed here. Okay. And coming soon, Delta queries for Outlook and Azure AD. So Delta queries meaning that you can sort of have a sync state, and then you can query the graph and say, tell me what has changed since the last time I checked. So that's a nice feature that's coming. And then Office 365 reports. So if any of you guys are familiar with looking at your user reports and things like that in Office 365 Admin Center, the graph is going to also expose that, so you can pull that data. Okay, so what does this mean for a line of business app? Well, the graph has quite a bit of things in it. And what we envision is that we want the graph to be easy enough to understand and easy enough to use that it can reduce the cost of automating a lot of your internal processes. So things that in the past may have been too cost prohibitive to automate, the graph can help there. Lowering that cost, something that just in an afternoon maybe, someone can knock out a script or a simple app to automate a lot of those processes. Excuse me. Okay, so with that being said, the Office folks have sort of put together this large sample of a line of business app, which does a lot of things with the graph to provision this web application that's based in SharePoint. And it's a real estate management, a property management type application. And I'll show you guys the app a little bit, but it entirely uses the graph to both provision the app and then drive the app, how it pulls data from SharePoint and everything like that. So it handles app setup and configuration. It goes out, checks your SharePoint, creates the site, provisions all the site, creates groups for each property. That's the way it sort of silos things. It creates Office 365 groups and provisions users. Okay. Now today, because as I mentioned earlier, the SharePoint stuff is not 100%. It's still in preview. So we can't actually create a site through the graph. So we do have to kind of fall back for that piece of it to the old SharePoint APIs. But then adding everything into the lists and everything is handled through the graph. Okay, so give you sort of a comparison and contrast. This is from that sample application, and this is creating the actual site with the old CSOM APIs. So if any of you guys have done SharePoint development, you're probably familiar with this. It probably looks somewhat familiar to you. But you can see it looks kind of nasty. As a developer, I look at this. I'm not a SharePoint guy. And I look at this and I say, user code maximum level, I'm not really sure what that is. Time zone ID is 7. I'm sure that means something, but I don't know what time zone that could be, right? So that's a thing. But then let's look at provisioning a group with the graph. Okay, this becomes a lot clearer. Hopefully you can look at this and understand exactly what it's doing, even if you're not a developer, right? Everything is sort of spelled out with easy to understand names. Mail enabled is true. Okay, that makes sense. It's mail enabled. Description, security enabled, all these things should make basic sense. And you can see it's just a couple of lines of code, right? I'm defining the group, and then I'm calling that graph API to add it. Okay, so this is a good point. Let's take a look real quick at the app itself. Okay. Nope. Okay. What went wrong? All right, bear with me, guys. So I know what happened there. I was logged in as a non-allowed user to that SharePoint site in another tab in Chrome. So it was picking up the fact that I was logged in as that user and then trying to access the site. So if we give this a second, hopefully it'll allow me to log in as another user. While we're waiting for that, does anyone have any questions about the graph so far? Yes, sir.
Teams?
Teams?
Yeah. When does that get forwarded?
I'm sorry?
When does that information get forwarded to Graph?
When does team come on the graph? I don't have a timeline for that, but I would say it would not be far. I know that they have their own API sort of spun up on their own endpoint. So once that's in place, it's very easy for the graph to sort of incorporate them and bring them into the fold.
Okay, so today it's going to be bringing content from a SharePoint site and the Teams two separate for APIs.
Right.
Sure that's the right word?
May not be. Yeah, should have been. Okay. There we go. Is OAuth 2 the only way to authenticate? Yes, it is. So the graph does require that you do OAuth 2, but you can do implicit flow, authorization code flow, or client credential flow. So Any of those flows will work. And in some cases, username, password type flows will work, but you have to be real careful using that sort of flow. And that's what we're seeing here is that we're doing an OAuth login, so it's redirecting us to the Azure login page to do that login.
How does that work with desktop apps?
Desktop apps? We have some libraries that can integrate with desktop apps, and they can open a browser proxy. So you can do a sign in through the browser and then get the tokens redirected back to your app. You can also do client credential flow, which allows you to authenticate as the app rather than as a user. And in that case, you use a certificate to authenticate. So you can go headless, essentially. Okay, so here's this example app, and the Contoso Property Manager. And all of this is pulling from Office 365 groups through the graph and SharePoint lists. Okay, so we create these groups for the different properties, and we assign users to those groups for inspectors and maintenance people, and they can open trouble tickets and give reports on things that need to be fixed. Anyway, not a whole lot to it, but if you go to the Office Dev GitHub repository, you can get this sample. You can see exactly how it builds sites, how it provisions things. And there's a sister sample to it, which is mobile apps. And those are supposed to be the apps that the inspectors use or the maintenance people use when they go on site. And it allows them to do things like take pictures of broken or leaky faucets and upload it to the group, open trouble tickets, things like that. So very, very involved sample, very cool to look at if you guys are interested. Okay, so as I said, like one of the big goals of Graph is to really just make these things as simple and easy as possible to help drive down that cost of automating a lot of your internal processes. We all know that when you do things manually, you may even have a checklist of things that have to be done to provision a site or add a user to a specific group of employees. People do things slightly different. It introduces slight variations in things, and it can break things down or just make things work weird. So that's one of the big driving goals of the graph. You can do a ton of things here. Oh, sorry. Translating your internal processes and automating a lot of it. You can do things like assigning enterprise resources and licenses. So think of when you create a new user, right? If you're using Office 365, you have to go and assign, say, an Exchange license to that user so that they get a mailbox, right? You can do all of this through the graph. Just as an example, so maybe in your business, when you close a deal, you have processes, and normally an admin goes and creates a group for that new deal with that company and uploads project plans, right? And then creates time management spreadsheets. And so maybe this is a standard process in your company. Well, that's something that you could all automate through the graph. So that could all just happen through a script or through an internal web app or what have you. Okay, another example. We hire someone. A new employee comes into your company. The HR professional then goes and has a list of things that they need to do for that user in SharePoint. And they just manually walk that down and do those tasks, right? Someone over in IT creates the user in Active Directory, and then the HR professional goes into Planner. Anyone use Planner yet? Office 365 Planner? Okay, cool. Goes into Planner and creates some tasks for that new employee. Here are the things that you should be doing in the next 30 days, right? Getting hooked up with payroll, your direct deposit, filling out, all that paperwork, attending some training, meeting with your manager, that sort of thing. Well, this is, again, something that we could all automate through the graph. And we'll take a look at that. So taking a look at that specific scenario, right? So we said the HR professional had that list of tasks, the list of things that the new employee needed to do in SharePoint. Well, we can pull all of that through the graph. Just going a standard get to a URL like this, we can get a bunch of JSON that gives us all this information about those items in SharePoint. Okay? And then we could say, okay, now we need a plan in Planner, all right, for that user. So we can, using the graph, we can go to our plans and create a new plan. And then we can start adding buckets to the plan and start adding tasks all through the graph. Okay, and then maybe we need an Excel spreadsheet, some timesheets for the user. We can upload those as well. So let's take a look at how we could do that in the graph. And I'm not going to run more code for you guys. I'm going to show you. I need to stop the slideshow. There we go. I'm going to show you how you can discover this sort of stuff for yourself. So this is the graph website. This is your starting point for learning whatever you want to learn about the graph. graph.microsoft.io. Okay? And all of the documentation is listed here. So you can see all of the different workloads and object types that you can work with and get examples of how to call those APIs. But the really nice thing up here is this Graph Explorer. This lets you, without writing any code, just go ahead and play with the graph and see what you can do. So I'm going to attempt to go through those steps that we talked about with bringing a new employee on, creating the, actually the user's already created, but we'll handle everything else, okay, through the graph. So if I sign in, I can actually work with my organization's data here. Okay, and just as a quick test, we can just run that. So I just did a get on /me to see who I am, and I see this data that comes back, right? Okay, cool, so we all believe that it works. Okay, so we have, let's say, a new user, Ben. So we can start by using the graph to just get Ben. Okay. So we can see here we've got a user object that came back. There's a lot of things here like assigned plans. So our IT department's already created him and gotten him hooked up with Exchange, so we're good. And the piece of data that we want here so that we can sort of tie back to him is his ID. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and copy that out. Okay, now we've got a group in Exchange, or in Office 365, I should say. And let's go ahead and just take a quick look at that group for new hires. So we want to add him to that new hire group. Okay, so we can take a look now at the current members, and we can see that the administrator, he created it, so he's a member, and we've got someone over here who's a member, but no Ben, okay? So let's go ahead and get that new hire group too, so that we know the ID of the group. And you see here I'm using OData Filter. So if I didn't put this filter and I just said give me groups, I'd get all the groups, and I'd have to dig through it to find that one, okay? Here I'm just saying give me the one where display name is equal to new hires. Okay, and you can see I've got, looks like one group came back, which is kind of what I expect. Okay. And we'll go ahead and copy the ID of that group as well. Okay, everyone with me? We good? Okay, cool. Okay, so now we're going to actually add the employee to the group. We've got those two pieces of information that we need. We've got the ID of the group. We've got the ID of the user. Okay, we're good. So we're going to make a post back to the group. And using that sort of traversal method. So we've got the group by ID, then we've got a /members, so we're going to that members relationship on the group, and we're going to post to it. Okay, and here I'm passing in the ID of the directory object I want to add to the group. Okay, so I need to replace this ID with Ben's ID. Sorry?
You changed your request and you flipped it from a get to a post.
Ah, thank you. Oh, did I have the right? Okay. Thank you. Yep. Okay. Well, it's quite embarrassing. I start object.
Go back to your markdown. Yeah. And your code.
Mm-hmm.
Copy your post.
Okay, should work. Ah, okay. Well, anyway, well, that kind of breaks things for us. But hopefully we can soldier on here. So we'll come back to that maybe if we have time later. So we have the group. Let's see if we can go ahead and pull the plan. and we can see how that would work. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm looking for plans that are assigned in the group. And again, I'm using that filter parameter, and I'm telling me, Planner API, give me plans that are owned by this group, okay? Okay, so, and we have the one plan here. Great. Now, using this ID, we're going to traverse and get the buckets that are inside that plan. Okay? And so if you guys have used Planner at all, it's sort of like a Trello board or something similar to that, where you have buckets and you can add tasks into a plan and then kind of assign them to those buckets, right? So we can have, in this one we have not started, in progress, and complete. So you can imagine you get tasks there, they get assigned to someone, and then they move them through the different phases, right? So we want the not started bucket because we're going to assign some tasks to the new user. Okay, and yes, I copied the ID of the not started bucket here. Okay? All good with that? Okay, now we remember that our task list is maintained in SharePoint by the HR professional. So we need to go pull that data to find out what tasks we need to assign. Okay? So we're going to change gears and go to the /SharePoint API. And we're going to use this is a SharePoint specific sort of syntax, right? That allows me to say, well, I know where the site is. I know kind of the friendly URL of it. Give me this site that matches this friendly URL, okay? There we go. You can see the full URL to the site here. So this is our HR site in SharePoint. And our next step, we want to get the lists that are defined in that site. Okay, so we're going to use the ID for the site. And go to the /lists endpoint. Okay, so we got quite a bit of stuff back here. So we got announcement, events. Okay, so there's a lot here. So can we kind of refine this and make it easier for us to find what we're looking for? Well, absolutely. So again, we can use that filter syntax and get the list with a specific name. We already know the name, it's new hire task, so we can just pull it that way. Okay, great. They gave us exactly one object back for the list. Perfect. So now we want to get the items in that list. Okay, so just to show the traversal here, so we were at /lists, right? So now we've added on the ID for the list, and then we've gone a level deeper to the items in that list. And then I've added a little bit of OData here, which is an expand command or parameter. So I'm saying that, all right, give me the list, but I want you to go even a level deeper in those items and look in the column set, which is another level in the graph, and just go ahead and expand it for me, because I don't want to get each item and then get each item's column set. So just give me that list of items and expand the column set for me. Okay. Okay, and then here's our list of items. Okay, so let's kind of take a little bit closer look at this. We can see the metadata that SharePoint maintains, like who created it, who last modified it, URL, and then we can see the column set is expanded. If I hadn't put that expand statement in there, you wouldn't even see this bit. And the column set is really where we want to get that data from, which is, here we go, title, complete payroll enrollment, and description, set up direct deposit and complete your W-2. All right, so we've got a number of these types of items here. Then the final step would be that the app would go through each one of these and then create a task in Planner. So let's create one of them. Let's try. And for this, we're going to go and do a post back to the tasks endpoint on the graph. Okay, so we can see that essentially I've put just a little bit of data in here, assigned to being an ID of a user, plan ID, which plan do we want to add this to, the bucket ID, which bucket does it get sorted into, so this is the plan ID for new hire tasks, it's the bucket ID for not started, and then there's a title for the task, okay? Okay, and we got a 201 response and a JSON representation of that new task. And if we go look in the group, you can see there's an old task that was there before and the new task that got created. Okay, so that's sort of how you can do this. Obviously, in a line of business app, it would all be automated. We wouldn't be pasting things in, but the Graph Explorer gives you that chance to really figure out what you can do, try APIs. You see something in the reference, go try it out. Okay. All right. Okay, so now I'll switch gears a little bit and kind of give you another example of using the graph by kind of talking about a third-party product. So a lot of business apps, and especially the graph, really rely on the quality of your directory data, right? If your directory data is not there, your apps don't work as well, right? If someone's email addresses aren't in the directory or their phone numbers, your app can't show those things. You can't make use of them. That's where this product, Hyperfish, kind of comes into play. So their whole goal is to scrub your Active Directory, give you reports on what data is missing, and then give tools to easily allow users to sort of self-serve and update that data, provide that missing data. This is not a commercial for Hyperfish. The reason I'm bringing this up, they use the graph to do all of this. Okay, so this is another example of a way you can use the graph to make things better. So, give you an example. This is sort of just a screenshot of their UI, but it would scan your directory and give you reports on what sort of data is missing, percentages. So, this looks like it's in a pretty bad state. But then it will go one step further. And as I said, it's going to allow users to sort of self-serve. And they've got a lot of different tools, such as it can send an email to the user and say, hey, we're missing some information for you in our directory. It can use Skype and actually, using bots, prompt the user and say, hey, can you have a minute? Can we update some stuff in your directory entry? But I don't know if you guys can see this. Yeah, I think you can. This bit of sort of gray text here above the mobile phone. So in this particular case, Ann Wallace, it was detected that her mobile phone entry was missing. But using the graph, their tool went out and said, where might we find that data? So instead of relying on her and just saying, hey, what's your mobile phone number? And then she has to type it in, and so maybe that's an annoyance to her and she ignores it. They went out and looked for other places they might find her mobile phone, and they found it in her Outlook signature. How many of us have signatures set up in Outlook that say, hey, here's my phone number, here's my work hours, whatever. They found this, they detected it, they said, this looks like a mobile phone number. So they went ahead and pre-populated it and give her that prompt. Are we right? Is this correct? And allow her to just quickly yes or no. Okay. Another great example. Okay, so Intune. This is something really new to the graph. We only just recently, like last week or so, released the preview documentation for Intune API. So I'm not going to demo this, but I'm going to show you guys just a little bit of what it can do. So if you're familiar with Intune, Intune is sort of a mobile management solution and allows you to, your IT staff to provision apps and assign apps, make them required for users on their corporate devices, things like that. Okay, so we can use Intune to automate all of that stuff. So here is an example where they're actually provisioning an app into Intune. So they've gone to Apple, and Apple has REST APIs to pull this information about a specific app in the Apple App Store, the Contoso inspection app, which would go back with that property management app that we looked at earlier. So they've got that information. They're posting that up to Intune. Right? This is a iOS app, so they're setting some information about the devices and the supported operating systems for Apple. Okay. And then with another post, they can actually go and assign that app to a group of users. Right, so that was the Contoso inspection app, so they're assigning it to their inspectors group. So any of their users in the directory that are a member of that group, they're going to get that app assigned to them, and they are saying that it is required. Okay, so just some quick, simple little posts to the API to automate all that stuff. Okay, and finally we talked about, I mentioned way back on one of the slides about extending your own line of business data into the graph. So what this can do is essentially take any kind of custom data that your app may rely on and link it back to things that already exist in the graph. Okay? reverse links back to maybe some other app that you use internally, or just metadata that you need to enhance something with. Okay. Right now, Outlook is the only workload that supports this, but this is something that we are working to expand out to other areas like OneDrive and SharePoint, what have you. Okay, so as an example, this is speculation, but this is the Boomerang add-in in Outlook. Okay, and if anyone's used Boomerang, it's essentially a way for you to deal with an email that you come in, it comes in, and you say, okay, I need to deal with this, but maybe someone else will deal with it, and you can see it's sent to a large group of people. But I'm going to go ahead and set for myself a reminder to, if no one else has dealt with this, then remind me in a couple of days or whatever, right? And so we can imagine that Boomerang could use this sort of extensibility to save on that message sort of a due date, right? Remind me in 2 days. Maybe that's how they're doing it. I don't know. I don't have any internal knowledge, but it's an example of a scenario. And again, this is very simple with the graph. We just post into the actual object where we want to store the data, and it has this extensions relationship. And then the extensions are very easy to create. The type is always the same. Then extension name, we recommend using sort of that domain name sort of construction so that you don't overrun someone else's, right? But you can name it whatever you want, whatever makes sense for your app. And then it's essentially a free-for-all. You can create any sort of JSON type payload that makes sense for your app. And here it's something very simple, right? We're adding to a contact information about our sales opportunity. So we have a line of business app that manages information about what the sales opportunity is with a particular company, and we can link that back to the contact. So it's right there in our Outlook. Our app can access it and pull that data. Okay? And then to get that data back, it's just a get back to, again, the object, the contact ID, and extensions, and then we just append on that extension name when we created it. Okay? So let's try it real quick. Okay. Sorry, I want to get to another user that I know has some contacts there. Okay. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to pull my list of contacts. And again, I'm going to use that expand mechanism, right, to traverse down to that lower level, the extensions level, and actually just see if any of my contacts already have that opportunity manager extension on them. Okay, so I can take a look, and I've got a contact here for this guy. And if I look in extensions, I can see that it's empty. Okay? So, okay, let's go ahead and add that data to the user. Come on now. Uh-oh. Okay, there we go. So what I'm going to do is kind of take advantage of a neat little feature in Graph Explorer. If I click on this ID, you can see that it's clickable. It'll actually put it up here in the URL bar for me. Okay. Of course, I can't post directly to that, so I'm getting an error. But that's okay. It gives us a starting point. I just want to append that extensions. So that's what we're going to post to. And we'll just post that example straight from the slide. Okay? Okay. Again, I got a 201. 201 is, I believe, created. Lets me know that it succeeded, and I get that JSON representation of the actual extension. So now we try to list our contacts again with that same expand. Now we can see that the data is there right in our contact view. Okay? So pretty simple stuff. Okay, so just to sum up, I mean, this has been a very shallow slice of really what the graph has to offer, and we're constantly adding more stuff to it. But I hope that this sort of give you a kind of a taste of what it can do and the potential there, and maybe spark some ideas for how you can go back and use this in your own company. So just quick plug here for these things. Dev.office.com for the Office platform. There's actually links back to that graph.microsoft.io right from dev.office.com, and you can sign up for the Office Developer Program, all kinds of cool things. Follow us on Twitter at Office Dev. So even though it's Office Dev, they handle all the graph stuff as well. So graph announcements, Office announcements, all coming through Twitter. And leave us feedback. If there's things that you don't like, there's things that you'd like to see, leave us feedback on user voice. They do use that quite a bit to get an idea of the pulse and what people are looking for. If you start using this and you have questions, you have problems, you run into things that you can't figure out, Stack Overflow is great. We have tons of guys, program managers, devs, all of us looking and watching Stack Overflow, looking at these tags. This is really kind of a mashup of everything Office here, but obviously Microsoft Graph, if you're doing Graph, that would be the tag you'd want to use. And so with that being said, that's really all I've got that's prepared. We've got about 15 more minutes if anyone has questions. OneNote, no, OneDrive. But if you're interested in seeing what's in the graph, this is the best place to go and take a look. And you can really get a good overview just looking down this high-level table of contents. Now this is the released version here that we're looking at, so the V1. If you want to see really like kind of the cutting edge, if you go down to the bottom, there's the beta reference. And you can see it looks very similar. Well, look at that, OneNote. So if we look at OneNote, you can get an idea of the sort of things that you can do with, let's start with notebooks. So list notebooks, create notebooks, get, copy, all these sorts of things. And if you take a look at, let's say you want to create notebooks, this gives you, an overview. These are the places that you need to post to. These are how you construct the URLs, what you supply in the request body, and there's going to be examples and things like that down at the bottom as well. Okay? So, and then you hop right over to the Graph Explorer and you cut and paste and you try it out. Okay? Anyone else? All right. Well, if that's it, like I said, there's about 15 more minutes. I'll stick around if anyone has private questions that they want to ask. But thanks for coming, guys. Safe travels.